My life felt so perfect that sometimes I envied myself. I had a wife who wasn't just my partner, but my best friend, my inspiration, and the person who always stood by me during my darkest moments. Together, we were building our future step by step. She had a way of making every day special, and I thought she loved me as deeply as I loved her. I also had my best friend. He had been by my side for as long as I could remember. We grew up together, shared our joys and hardships, and confided in each other our most personal thoughts. He was like a brother to me, even though we weren't related by blood. Our shared memories spanned everything, from childhood adventures to late-night conversations where we dreamed about the future. What could be better than seeing the two closest people in your life get along so well? We spent so much time together, playing board games in the evenings, hosting parties, and planning joint vacations. My best friend often came over, and we laughed, drank coffee, and talked about future plans. I felt like we were one big, happy family. My wife often said he was one of the funniest and most genuine people she had ever met. Their laughter filled our home with life, and I thought I had everything anyone could wish for. We celebrated birthdays together, watched football games, and even came up with inside jokes that only the three of us understood. When I looked at them, I thought, I'm so lucky. Who else can boast of relationships this great? My best friend was always there when I needed help, and my wife was my anchor of stability and love. It felt like nothing could break this happiness. But you know how it goes. When everything seems too perfect, a storm is often hiding just beyond the horizon. While I didn't yet see the storm signs, the first cracks had already begun to appear. They were so subtle that I didn't even notice them at first. At the time, I couldn't have imagined that this home, filled with laughter and love, would soon become a place of pain and betrayal. For now, I was basking in my perfect life, unaware of how quickly it was about to fall apart. One evening, seemingly no different from any other, I noticed something that made me feel uneasy. My best friend, as usual, stopped by our house, but this time he stayed for dinner. It was unusual. He normally gave a heads up if he planned to stay late. But I thought, he's my friend. Maybe he just feels at home here. There's nothing wrong with that. Still, there was something different in the air, something barely noticeable but enough for me to sense it. During dinner, they exchanged jokes I didn't understand. Their laughter was louder than usual, as if they were overcompensating for something left unsaid. And their glances, those unsettled me the most. They lingered just a little too long. It was like an invisible thread connected them, one I couldn't sever. I felt out of place. Sitting at the table, I started to feel like my presence was unnecessary. It seemed like they were in their own little world, and I was just an observer. My wife laughed at his jokes with a genuine, loud laugh I hadn't heard in a long time. Her eyes sparkled, and there was a brightness in them that was completely new to me. I tried to join the conversation, but every comment I made felt misplaced. They continued talking as if I wasn't there. I cracked jokes, but they didn't even notice. For the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own home. After dinner, I tried to dismiss my unease. I told myself, maybe it's just a coincidence. They've always gotten along well. Why should I doubt them? It's just friendship. But the thoughts wouldn't leave me alone. Why did his jokes suddenly seem so funny to her? Why did she laugh with a sincerity I hadn't seen in her eyes for so long? And why did I feel like that laughter no longer belonged to me? That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying the evening in my head. Was I overthinking? Yet it was impossible to ignore what I had seen and felt. It was just a small thing. A few seconds of lingering glances and slightly louder laughter. But it was the first alarm bell. I began asking myself questions. Why didn't I notice this before? Is this something new? Or am I just imagining problems? There was no clear answer. But deep down, I already knew that this evening was only the beginning of something much bigger. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing even more changes. My wife became more distant, as if an invisible wall had suddenly grown between us. She spent almost all her time on her phone, scrolling and occasionally laughing. Her laughter sounded light, but there was something foreign in it. It wasn't the laughter I knew, not the kind she used to share with me. One evening, I noticed her texting and smiling to herself. When I asked who she was talking to, she quickly replied, "Oh, just a friend," and changed the subject. It seemed innocent, but my gut told me otherwise. The cracks in my perfect world were widening, and with every passing day, I felt more and more like an outsider in my own home. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, but the tension in the air and the growing sense of unease were impossible to ignore. Something had shifted, and I knew this was just the beginning of the storm. Every time I asked what had made her laugh, she would quickly dismiss it with, "Oh, just something funny my friend sent." But her responses felt too mechanical, as if she had rehearsed them in advance. I noticed that she had started locking her phone, something she had never done before. Previously, her phone would sit on the table for hours, and I had never felt the need to check it. But now, she wouldn't leave it unattended, even when stepping into the kitchen or bathroom. I began paying attention to the little things. She no longer looked me in the eyes as she used to. Her kisses had become short, more of a formality than an expression of affection. And whenever I tried to start a conversation about how she was feeling, she would quickly change the topic or say she was too tired. My best friend had changed as well. He used to walk into our home with a wide smile and jokes that could make even the neighbors laugh. But now his behavior was different. He no longer let me know when he was coming over. He just showed up unannounced. His smile seemed forced, his demeanor restrained. Sometimes he avoided making eye contact with me, which was entirely unlike him. What puzzled me even more was how they acted together. It felt like there was some invisible conspiracy between them. Their jokes seemed to carry double meanings, and they often ended conversations with phrases like, "You know what I mean." These moments stood out to me, but I couldn't fully understand them. I just felt that something had shifted, and it made me question everything I thought I knew. One day, I caught myself analyzing even the smallest actions. For instance, how they sat on the couch. If before they always kept a respectable distance, now they seemed to sit closer to each other, almost accidentally. Their knees nearly touched, and their laughter and subtle touches seemed too natural, as if they had grown used to such closeness. Am I going crazy? I asked myself, but I couldn't find an answer. I tried convincing myself that it was all in my head, that I was creating problems where there were none. But every time I looked at them, I felt an odd chill, as if something significant was happening right in front of me, yet I couldn't see it. These changes in my wife's and best friend's behavior were a troubling sign. But I still couldn't bring myself to believe that there might be something more than just friendship between them. After all, this was my wife, and my best friend. Yet deep down, I had already begun to suspect the worst. One quiet evening, my wife and I were sitting in the living room. I was reading a book, and she, as had become her habit, was engrossed in her phone. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, her face illuminated by the cold glow of the device. It had become a familiar sight, but this time, something was different. I noticed how her expression suddenly changed when her phone chimed with a new message. Her eyes widened, and her face tensed up. I glanced up from my book, trying to see who had sent the message. But she quickly turned her phone face down. It looked so suspicious that I almost asked her directly, "Who is it?" But I decided to keep watching instead. She hesitated for a second, then grabbed her phone and said, "I'll be right back. I need to call a friend." Her voice was too tense for it to be a casual call to a friend. She hurried into the next room without even glancing back at me. My curiosity quickly turned into anxiety. Something was definitely wrong. She had never hidden her calls before, and she had never had anything to hide. But now, everything seemed different. My suspicions, which had been tormenting me for a while, became undeniable. I decided to act. I quietly got up from my chair, my heart pounding harder with each step. I followed her to the next room, trying to move as silently as possible. She had left the door slightly ajar, and I could hear bits of her conversation. "Yes, I think he's starting to suspect." Her voice was muffled, but I heard every word. "We have to be careful. We can't let him find out," she continued, and I felt my legs almost give out beneath me. In that moment, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, despair, shock, and fear. I leaned against the wall, trying to process what I had just heard. Her voice sounded like someone sharing a secret that wasn't meant to be revealed. But why was she saying these things? And more importantly, who was she talking to? I moved closer, hoping to hear more. But she ended the call without even saying goodbye. I heard the soft click of her phone being locked and the sound of her footsteps approaching the door. I quickly stepped back into the living room, sat back in my chair, and pretended to be engrossed in my book. She returned a few seconds later with a strained smile on her face. "It was Lisa," she said casually, as if nothing had happened. "She's having some issues with her boyfriend." Her voice was calm, but I could see something else in her eyes. Something hidden. I nodded, trying to mask my emotions, but inside, a storm was raging. It wasn't just the words I'd overheard. It was the undertone, the implication that I couldn't ignore. Who was on the other end of that call? And why was she talking about me possibly suspecting something? Her words carried the weight of a secret she was desperate to keep. Now, instead of trust, the foundation of our marriage, all I felt was suspicion. Those few minutes turned my life upside down. I could no longer trust my own eyes and ears. Worst of all, I couldn't shake the thought of my best friend. Could my darkest suspicions be true? The next morning, I woke up with a single thought: I needed to know the truth. I couldn't live with this uncertainty any longer. The suspicions were poisoning my mind, and I resolved to find answers, no matter how painful they might be. I noticed that my wife, who used to leave her phone casually on the table or sofa, now carried it with her everywhere, like an extension of herself. Even when she went to the kitchen or the bathroom, her phone was always in her hand or nearby. This wasn't like her. I knew her habits, her relaxed behavior at home, and this was something new, something strange. A few times, I tried to casually take her phone, pretending I wanted to check the time or read the news. But it was always locked. When I casually asked her why she'd changed her usual passcode, she shrugged and replied nonchalantly, "Oh, just for security. You know how easy it is for phones to get hacked these days." Her answer sounded logical, but I noticed how quickly she changed the subject, as if trying to avoid further questions. It felt like another way to hide something from me. The next day, I decided to be more careful. During breakfast, I watched her closely. How she smiled at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, how her fingers flew over the screen as she typed, and how she always placed the phone face down when she put it down. That gesture, which I'd never noticed before, now felt glaringly obvious. What was she hiding? And why? I could no longer ignore the feeling that there was something going on between them. The thought consumed me. My mind replayed every little detail, every moment I might have missed. I remembered how my best friend would come over, stay for dinner, and laugh with her. How they would share inside jokes that only they seemed to understand. I remembered how he looked at her and how she looked back. And now I saw those looks in a completely different light. I decided to be vigilant about everything happening around me. I observed their behavior. Every gesture, every movement felt like a clue to something bigger. One evening, as we sat at dinner together, I noticed how she leaned toward him to say something. Their shoulders brushed, and they both laughed as if sharing the world's best-kept secret. It stung deeply. I try to stay composed, but I'm sure my eyes betrayed my anger, despair, and pain. I couldn't afford to lose control, but the sense of betrayal was growing stronger with each passing day. The next time my friend came over, I made an effort to stay in the room with them, watching their interactions closely. It only fueled my suspicions further. Their laughter, their glances. They thought I didn't notice, but I saw everything. Every little detail that had once seemed ordinary now felt like undeniable signs of something hidden. My patience was running out. I knew I had to find out the truth. But how? Should I confront them directly? Or gather more evidence? Every time I felt ready to talk to them, fear gripped me. What if it was true? What if my worst suspicions were confirmed? That fear paralyzed me. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't live in the dark any longer. It was only a matter of time before I uncovered what they were hiding. And even if it destroyed me, I had to know. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My head was filled with questions that had no answers. The suspicions were eating me alive, and I realized I couldn't wait any longer. I had to know the truth, even if it turned out to be devastating. I considered all my options and finally settled on something I never thought I'd do before. Ir en camera. The thought terrified me, but at the same time, it seemed like the only way to find out what was happening when I wasn't around. Maybe I'm overreacting, I tried to convince myself, but something inside whispered, "You need to know." I decided to act. The next day, I went to an electronics store under the guise of shopping for work. I chose a small, discreet camera that could easily be hidden among books or decorations. It recorded high-quality video and had a built-in microphone, so I could hear every word. The salesperson had no idea how important this purchase was to me. Driving home, I hid the box in the trunk, my heart racing with nerves. I knew I was taking a risk. If I got caught, it could complicate everything. But I also knew I couldn't live with this uncertainty any longer. Late that night, after my wife had gone to bed, I carefully unboxed the camera. Its design was simple but functional. I stared at it for a long time, as if it could somehow answer all my questions. Then I quietly went to the living room, the place where my wife and my best friend spent the most time together. This was their territory, and if anything was happening, it would be here. I choose a place for the camera, on the bookshelf, next to a decorative vase. Its dark casing blends perfectly with the rest of the decor, and I'm confident no one will notice it. As I set it up, my hands tremble. Every movement feels louder in the quiet of the night, and I keep glancing over my shoulder to make sure my wife hasn't woken up. When the camera is in place, I check its functionality via my phone. The image is sharp, the sound crystal clear. It gives me a strange sense of control that I had long lost. Now, all that's left is to wait. The next few days are a test of my endurance. I try to act natural, as though nothing has changed. But every time my wife or my friend enters the living room, I find myself watching them closely. I imagine the camera silently recording their every move, every word. At night, I go to bed later than usual, waiting for my wife to fall asleep so I can review the footage. Each time I pick up my phone and open the app, my heart tightens with fear. What will I see? Will my suspicions be confirmed? Or have I truly been imagining everything? The first few days of recording seem normal. My wife sits on the couch, watches TV, scrolls through her phone, but I notice little things. She smiles frequently at her phone, her face lighting up as though she's eagerly awaiting every message. One time, when her phone rings, she quickly leaves the room, and I can no longer hear the conversation. Something about it feels off. I keep waiting, reviewing new recordings every morning. Each click on my phone feels like opening a door to a world I didn't want to enter. But I know I can't stop. The truth is the only thing I need, even if it's painful. Every time I walk into the living room, I glance at the bookshelf where the camera is hidden. It silently observes, capturing everything I can't see with my own eyes. And I know the moment of truth is drawing closer. One ordinary morning, as I wake up earlier than my wife, I open the app to review the latest footage. This routine has become second nature. My heart races, my hands tremble slightly, but my need to uncover the truth outweighs my fear. I play the most recent recording, and at first nothing seems unusual. On the screen, my wife sits on the couch, holding a cup of coffee, while my best friend lounges in the armchair nearby. They're chatting as always, but this time something about their behavior feels different. Their faces glow with a kind of energy. Their laughter seems more intimate. Their gazes linger on each other just a little too long. Every gesture between them seems too familiar, too personal for just friends. At first, I try to convince myself I'm overreacting. But then I see a moment that makes my stomach drop. My friend leans toward her, placing his hand on her shoulder, and not only does she not pull away, but she places her hand over his. Their fingers intertwine for a few seconds, and then she smiles, a smile I always thought was mine, the smile that symbolized our love. My heart pounds even faster, but what happens next completely breaks me. I hear her say in a soft, almost whispering voice, "I don't know how to tell him. I feel so guilty, but I can't keep hiding this." My friend looks at her with a strange expression of sympathy and replies, "We have to find a way. He deserves to know the truth." Those words hit me like a knife to the back. In that moment, everything clicks into place. Every glance, every gesture, every call and message I had dismissed as innocent now takes on a sinister meaning. My life, which I thought was perfect, is falling apart at the seams. I can't take my eyes off the screen. Their words and actions confirm the worst of my suspicions. Suspicions I had tried so hard to ignore these past weeks. This was no longer speculation. This was the truth, and it was undeniable. My best friend and my wife, the two people I trusted most, had betrayed me. They were destroying me behind my back while I was still trying to hold on to our family and our friendship. I sit in silence, staring at the screen. My mind is screaming, but no sound escapes my lips. That scene replays in my head over and over. Their faces, their words, their gazes. My world will never be the same again. I turn off the recording and sit in the empty room. A wave of emotions crashes over me. Anger, pain, betrayal, despair. But above all, I feel emptiness. How could they do this to me? How could I have been so blind? My decision is clear. I can no longer live in this lie. I know I have to act, but first, I allow myself to process this truth. That night was the worst of my life, but it was necessary for me to see who they truly were. The next evening, I come home earlier than usual. There's a tension in the air, almost palpable. In the living room, they're both there. My wife sits on the couch with a cup of tea, and my best friend lounges in the armchair as if it's his home. They're talking, but as soon as I enter, their conversation abruptly stops. I stand by the doorway, silent. The room is thick with unspoken words, and the quiet feels unbearable. My palms are sweaty, and my heart pounds so loudly I'm sure they can hear it. I try to keep my composure, though anger is bubbling inside me, ready to erupt. "Is there something you want to tell me?" I ask, trying to stay calm. But my voice betrays the tension. It sounds cold and sharp like a strike. They fall silent. My wife grips her cup tightly, as if it's the only thing grounding her in reality. Her face pales, and her eyes dart around, searching for answers. My best friend lowers his gaze, and I can see his hands clenching into fists, as if bracing himself for something. I take a few steps forward, trying to hold back the wave of emotions. They both look at me, but remain silent, as if unsure of what to say. I take a deep breath and add, "I saw you. Those 3 words change everything. They strike like lightning, shattering the tense silence hanging in the room. My wife immediately starts crying, her shoulders shaking as tears stream down her cheeks. She tries to say something, but her voice breaks on the first words. "It's not what you think," she begins, but I sharply raise my hand, silencing her. "Not what I think." I raise my voice, and it's clear I can no longer keep myself under control. "I saw everything. I heard you talking. You hugged. You were sitting on my bed." My friend finally lifts his head and tries to speak. "Listen, I know how it looks, but it was a mistake. We never wanted this to happen." I cut him off, not giving him a chance to justify himself. "How could you? I trusted you more than anyone else. I thought you were like a brother to me. We went through everything together, and you destroyed it all?" My words hit him, and I see his jaw clench as if he's struggling to find a response. But that's not enough. I turn to my wife. "And you? How could you? We were partners. We built a life together that I thought was perfect, and now you've destroyed it all?" She breaks into tears again, trying to explain. "I didn't want this to happen. I was lonely. You were always busy, and he was there. But I love you. I want to fix this." "Fix it?" I repeat sarcastically, laughing through tears of anger and pain. "How are you going to fix this? Do you think it's something that can just be erased and forgotten? How do you expect me to trust you after this?" I look at them both, and the silence fills the room once more. But this time, it's not just silence. It's a heavy, crushing silence that speaks louder than any words. It's the moment I realize nothing will ever be the same again. I stand there looking at the people I once considered the closest to me. Their guilty faces and silence only deepen my pain. I have no more words. There's only one feeling. I can't stay in this room any longer. "You both betrayed me," I say quietly, but my voice sounds like a verdict. "You no longer have a place in my life." I turn and leave the room, leaving them in that suffocating silence. But in my mind, only one question echoes. How could they do this to me? I sit on the edge of a chair in the living room, clenching my fists so tightly that my nails dig into my skin. In front of me are the 2 people I once considered the most important in my life. My wife sits on the couch, sobbing uncontrollably, while my best friend stares down at his hands, seemingly searching for solace in their shadows. Their silence only amplifies the tension. There's a storm inside me, and I can't wait any longer. "Well," I finally ask, unable to hide the anger and pain in my voice. "I want to hear how you're going to explain this. Go ahead. Tell me why you decided to tear my life apart." My wife is the first to try to speak. Her voice trembles, and each word sounds like a failed excuse. "It was a mistake. I don't know how it happened. I felt lonely when you were never home. You worked so much, and I was here alone. He was there, and There, I interrupt her, my face burning with outrage. "That's your excuse? You were lonely, so you decided to destroy our marriage with my best friend?" She starts crying even harder, her shoulders shaking as tears pour out. She can't speak anymore, but I don't feel any sympathy for her. My emotions are dulled. Pain, despair, anger, all mixed into one. I turn my gaze to him, my best friend, the person I trusted with all my secrets, with whom I shared the most important moments of my life. His eyes finally meet mine, but there isn't a trace of remorse in them. He takes a deep breath and starts to speak. "Listen, I know this looks terrible, but I couldn't help myself. I've been in love with her for a long time, even before you got married. But I stayed silent because I didn't want to ruin our friendship. And then it just happened." His words feel like a cold knife. "In love with her for a long time?" I take a breath, so deep it feels like my lungs might burst. "You've been in love with her?" I repeat, almost laughing at the absurdity of the situation. And that's your excuse? You decided that gave you the right to betray me? That it's okay to destroy our relationship, my marriage, everything we've been through together? He tries to explain. I know it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. I never wanted to hurt you. Didn't want to hurt me? My voice rises to a shout. You hurt me in the worst possible way. You took everything I held sacred and destroyed it. My wife interrupts again, her voice barely audible through her tears. It was never supposed to go this far. We didn't know how to stop. Stop! I repeat, disbelief thick in my voice. Why not stop before it even started? Why not think about the consequences? Their excuses sound hollow. I look at them and can't listen any longer. Their words, their tears, all of it feels so fake that I can't muster even an ounce of sympathy. Both of them are trying to justify their actions, but none of their explanations can restore what I've lost. Trust, love, faith in people. I don't need your apologies. I say quietly but firmly. I don't need either of you anymore. You destroyed everything. You broke my heart, my life. And you know what? I don't want to see you again. I stand up from the chair, feeling every muscle in my body tense. They look at me, but I no longer feel anything for them. No love, no friendship, no sympathy. Just emptiness. The next few days were the hardest of my life. I wandered through the house that was once filled with warmth and laughter, but now felt cold and unfamiliar. Every object reminded me of their betrayal. The couch where we used to sit together. The kitchen table where we discussed plans for the future. Even the pictures on the walls, which once brought joy, now brought only pain. I couldn't live like this anymore. This house, built with the thought of family, had become a constant reminder of how everything had fallen apart. Thousands of thoughts swirled in my head, but one thing was clear. I had to move on. Staying close to these people, allowing them to remain a part of my life, would mean continuing to live in lies and pain. I gathered all my strength and called my wife. She stood in front of me, her eyes red from crying. She already knew what I was going to say, but I said it out loud anyway. You need to leave. We can't live together anymore. This is the end. Her lips trembled, and she tried to say something. Please, we can fix this. I know I made a mistake, but I love you. I'm willing to fight for our relationship. But I just shook my head. I could hear the desperation in her voice, but I could no longer believe her words. Her love, her promises, they no longer held any weight. Love? How can you talk about love after everything that's happened? You didn't just betray me. You destroyed our trust. And I can't get that back. She cried, but I remained firm. My resolve didn't waver, even as she packed her things. Her departure was painful, but also liberating. It was a step I needed to take to start my new life. Then it was time to talk to my friend. I called him to say I no longer wanted anything to do with him. He tried to justify himself, saying he made a mistake, but I gave him no chances. To me, he was no longer a friend. He was someone who betrayed me in the worst way possible. You are no longer a part of my life, I said firmly. I trusted you like a brother, and you tore apart everything we had. I forgive you, but I will never forget, and I don't want to hear your voice again. After that conversation, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. I was alone now. There was something terrifying about it, but at the same time, it was freeing. My home was now just mine, my life, mine alone. The first days were awful. The silence was unbearable. I wandered through the house, thinking about how things could have been different. But each new day brought me new strength. I started focusing on things I hadn't had time for before. I began taking better care of myself, both physically and emotionally. I realized that this betrayal, as painful as it was, had given me a chance to rediscover myself. One day, I sat on the couch, looked at the empty table, and realized I had made the right choice. I didn't destroy my life, they did. But now I could start fresh. I could build a new life, one without lies and betrayal. I end this story with these words. Betrayal breaks you. It pulls the ground out from under your feet and makes you question everything you believed in. But it also gives you a chance to look at yourself, find your strength, and start anew. I lost the people I loved, but I found something more important. I found myself. It was a hard lesson, but it made me stronger. And if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember this. Your life doesn't end with betrayal. It's just a new beginning,